Today, we're diving into something that is, honestly, an absolute masterclass in biological engineering, the female reproductive symphony. And hey, forget those dry, boring textbook diagrams you might be used to. What we're actually unpacking here is a highly coordinated, incredibly dramatic story of timing, cellular communication, and survival. Let's get right into it.
To really grasp the sheer scale and the drama of this system, just think about this number for a second, 999. Every single month during a woman's reproductive years, roughly 999 ovarian follicles literally self-destruct. They go through a programmed cellular die-off called atresia. And why? Also, just one single dominant egg can survive, mature, and eventually ovulate. It's essentially a high-stakes, microscopic competition happening right inside the body.
Okay, so let's quickly lay out the playing field here. The main stage features the paired ovaries, which are basically these incredible dual-purpose factories, pumping out both hormones and gametes. From there, we trace the path through the fallopian tubes, specifically those little finger-like fimbria sweeping the egg inside, leading down into the muscular uterus with its dynamic lining, the endometrium. And finally, the cervix, leading into the vagina. The whole setup is flawlessly designed for this process. But here's the twist. The real conductors of this biological symphony, they're not even in the pelvis. They're up in your brain. And that brings us to a really crucial concept, the HPO Axis. That stands for the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. If you want to understand how this all works, you have to understand this network. It's basically an endocrine superhighway where the brain is constantly sending chemical text messages down to the reproductive organs, and those organs are constantly replying. So how does that cross-body conversation actually play out? Well, the hypothalamus sits up in the brain acting like a master metronome. It pulses out a hormone called GnRH. That pulse tells the pituitary gland right below it to release two very important messengers, LH and FSH. Those travel all the way down to the ovaries, telling them to make estrogen and progesterone. And what's super cool is the feedback loop here. Normally, those ovarian hormones travel right back up to the brain and say, "Got the message, you can chill out now." That's negative feedback. But at one specific critical time of the month, they literally scream, "Give us more," and flip it into a positive feedback loop. Section 1, Tale of the Follicle. Let's dive into that high-stakes journey. Now, this brings us right back to that massive cellular die-off we talked about earlier. The biological inefficiency here is just staggering. Look at this. Halfway through gestation, a female fetus has around 7 million primordial follicles. By birth, it drops to 1 million, by puberty, we're down to 300,000, and by the time premenopause hits, it's under 1,000. So over an entire lifetime, only about 400 to 500 eggs will ever actually make it to ovulation. The rest? They are continually dying off in the background. It's a ruthless funnel of selection. And for the follicles that don't die right off the bat, they enter what is essentially an absolute free-for-all. A cohort gets recruited, and they all start growing together. But here's the catch. As they grow, they release a hormone called inhibin, which actively suffocates the brain's supply of FSH. So the only way to survive is to be the absolute most sensitive to whatever tiny drop of FSH is left. The one single follicle with the highest number of receptors wins the whole thing. It becomes the dominant Graafian follicle, while the rest just perish. Moving on to Section 2, the monthly masterclass. And really, this is a masterclass in biological timing. Let's look at the roadmap for a standard 28-day cycle. You can basically break it into two halves. Days 1 through 13 make up the follicular phase. This is all about growing that winning follicle and rebuilding the uterine lining. Then, right at day 14, boom, the main event, ovulation. The second half is the luteal phase, which is entirely about prepping the uterus just in case a fertilized egg shows up. If it doesn't, the whole thing resets with menstruation during days 1 to 5, which, interestingly enough, actually overlaps with the start of the next cycle. And when you map out the hormones here, it is a brilliantly choreographed dance. Just look at the massive spike right in the middle. That dominant follicle we talked about, it starts pumping out crazy amounts of estrogen, and instead of the usual slow down, negative feedback, this sudden flood triggers a positive feedback loop. The brain reacts by dumping a massive surge of luteinizing hormone, or LH, and that dramatic LH surge is the exact specific trigger for ovulation on day 14. But wait, how does a tiny follicle actually manufacture that massive spike of estrogen?
It uses an incredible microscopic assembly line called the two cells, two gonadotropins model. First, LH tells the outer theca cells to grab cholesterol from the blood and turn it into androgens. Yeah, male hormones like testosterone. Then, those androgens are passed inward to the granulosa cells. There, FSH activates an enzyme called aromatase, which beautifully transforms those raw androgens into refined 17-beta estradiol. It's a literal, flawless cellular relay race. Let's bring this down to earth for a second. If you've ever wondered how at-home ovulation test strips actually work, well, this is the secret. These strips are specifically designed to catch that exact massive LH surge we just talked about, because we know biologically that the LH surge happens exactly 24 to 48 hours before the egg is physically released. Catching it gives you a highly precise window for family planning.
And then we hit the climax of all this preparation. The LH surge doesn't just shuffle hormones around. It tells the follicle to produce special enzymes, things like matrix metalloproteinases and prostaglandins. And these act like microscopic wrecking balls. They literally break down the structural wall of the ovary itself until the dominant follicle ruptures and the egg is physically expelled out into the open to be caught by the fallopian tube. It is wild.
Section 3. The conductors, estrogen and progesterone. So after ovulation, that ruptured follicle doesn't just call it quits. It transforms into a temporary endocrine gland called the corpus luteum, and it starts pumping out our two main hormonal protagonists. Estrogen is all about growth and preparation, building up the endometrium and making watery cervical mucus so sperm can travel easily. Progesterone, on the other hand, is the great stabilizer. It stops the rapid growth, secretes nutrients to make the uterus cozy for implantation, thickens the mucus to block anything else from getting in, and essentially holds the whole second half of the cycle together.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that progesterone actually alters your baseline metabolism. Notice the shift in core body temperature here. Once ovulation happens and progesterone spikes, a woman's core temp actually goes up by roughly 0.5 degrees Celsius. This thermogenic effect isn't just a fun fact, it's a measurable, real-world metric used in natural family planning to absolutely confirm that ovulation took place.
Section 4. Beyond reproduction and lifespan, because this story is about so much more than just making babies. There is a massive misconception out there that these hormones only matter for the reproductive cycle. That is entirely false. Estrogen is, frankly, a systemic super hormone. It works directly with vitamin D to keep your bones dense and strong. It maintains the lining of your urinary tract. It fundamentally optimizes your lipid metabolism, raising the good HDL cholesterol and dropping the bad LDL. It enhances blood clotting, and it even keeps your skin thick and elastic by stopping collagen from breaking down. It is an absolutely crucial pillar for lifelong, full-body health. Which is exactly why looking at estrogen over a woman's lifespan is so important. We see it climb during puberty, spike erratically during pregnancy, and maintain a solid rhythm for decades. But then we hit menopause. And menopause isn't just the end of reproductive years, it is a massive, systemic withdrawal of a highly protective hormone. When ovarian activity drops off around age 50, that loss of estrogen triggers a huge cascade. We're talking bone mass dropping up to 50% by age 80, leading to postmenopausal osteoporosis, and the loss of that protective lipid profile, which sharply increases the risk for cardiovascular issues. Section 5. Physiology of sex. Let's look at the biological mechanics. So libido, or sexual desire, isn't just some abstract mood you fall into. It is a highly calibrated neurochemical balancing act occurring right in the brain. On one side of the scale, you have excitatory signals pushing the gas pedal, driven by a mix of estrogen, testosterone, dopamine, and oxytocin. On the other side, you've got inhibitory signals pulling the brake, things like serotonin, prolactin, and opioids. It's a delicate chemical tug-of-war that is heavily influenced by exactly where a woman is in her hormonal cycle. And the physical reality of the sexual act itself? It's a total marvel of autonomic nervous system coordination. When excited, the parasympathetic nervous system triggers hyperlemia, basically a massive, localized rush of blood. The clitoris engorges and expands, actually functioning remarkably similar to male anatomy, paired with essential lubrication. Then, at orgasm, the sympathetic and somatic nerves take the wheel, driving rhythmic, smooth muscle contractions, while oxytocin floods in to induce uterine contractions. And here's a unique biological advantage. Unlike male physiology, there is zero biological refractory period, allowing for significantly longer or even multiple consecutive orgasms. So wrap your head around this. How does a single microscopic chemical whisper of GnRH in the brain cascade down to orchestrate the brutal competition of millions of cells, govern a precise monthly cycle of creation and cellular death, protect the heart and bones for decades, and ultimately build the biological foundation of human existence? It's an incredibly intricate, flawlessly engineered system.